Hello, hello.
Hi.
Hi, guys. Hold on, let me just clean up a slide while we're people to pop in here. Everybody's coming. Good. Okay. Give it a second. So, how y'all doing?
Good.
That's good to hear. Hold on. I just want to do one quick thing. And I will be with you all. I'm just putting some last minute, some final slides I want to add for a conversation about graphic design. I've got so many examples. Okay. Okay. So let's talk. Does anyone have any let me just start by asking if anyone has any questions at this point. I guess what I should say maybe at the outset before I ask you that is today I'm gonna have us have a conversation about graphic design. We'll look at examples of the project that's due today, which is examples by students in the past, um, and we'll talk about just the four principles of design and styles of design from the past, and um, over the next several Zoom sessions, like basically from now through the end of the semester, what we'll do is we'll discuss together like all these different aspects of skills that you'll need, like all these different skill sets that you'll need to complete the final project. So having said that, though, let me just ask if there's any questions about anything at this point. No? Okay. So I notice this is something I know I talked to several of you guys about individually. I notice I'm the only one here with video screens on. Now I don't I respect everybody's privacy and I don't want anyone to feel like you're not doing that, but it's easier for me to talk to a Zoom session full of faces, or at least with some faces, so I can read the room a little bit than it is that if I'm just looking at a bunch of blank screens. So I don't know. It seems like this is a new era we're in, and there's an issue of Zoom etiquette, and I totally respect it. I want to have as good an atmosphere as possible, so that's going to be my basic rule of thumb about video screens or not. Totally up to you, but it does make it easier for me to communicate with you all when I can see you. So, and I guess you guys could see each other this way, right? So it makes it a little bit easier. So I appreciate you guys turning it on. And for those of you who don't, totally respect that, you know. All right. So let me see. Why don't I don't want to lecture you guys, but what I do want to do is maybe throw up some examples of four principles of graphic design and make sure everybody understands that before we get into looking at examples of student work or sort of troubleshooting this with your own ones. Um, and there are two other things that I think are important too. One is the concept of concepts, basically the notion that you think about your design. I think a lot of graphic designers, an important part of what makes them professional is that before they approach a design, they often, if not always, approach it by thinking conceptually about it. And I'll explain what I mean by that. And then finally, there's another aspect, which I maybe will just throw up some examples for you guys to think about, which is all the different artistic and cultural styles that have come before, and kind of whether you want to consider those sort of colors on your painting palette or tools in your toolbox. You pick the metaphor, but if these are things that you want to think about in terms of you know ideas or ways that you want to envision a design. I don't know that any of these artistic styles or cultural styles that have come before would have been terribly helpful for a layout like the one we did, for example, but it's worth really thinking about since we're talking about graphic design anyway. So let me just quickly show you guys examples of, does anyone, let me ask you guys this, does anyone want to feel brave and try and define, I'll throw out these 4 principles of design one at a time. We'll see if anybody wants to offer an explanation of how you understand what any of these are. So how about to begin with, we say we do balance. Do any of you guys have a sense of what that means? In terms of your design?
Maybe like not having it too cluttered, or like you could go by like talk about like the rule of thirds or something like that.
Yeah, that's one thing. How many of you guys watched my video where I give an example of where balance really becomes an issue? What's one of the best ways to think about balance when you're doing design? How many of you guys have put up pictures on your walls? Like, when was the last time y'all did that? Did you find there was any issue with like where you put one poster or picture or where you put another in terms of it looking off? You know what I'm talking about? So if you have, for example, and I don't have a drawing pad ready, but so I'll just have to ask you guys to imagine it. If you have let's say you have an 8.5 by 11 size page, and in the top left corner, you put a big picture, okay? And then in the bottom right corner, you put an equally sized big picture. Is that good design? Why not? Okay.
Because I personally think that it's better to have like more than one size, but like different amounts of. So like one thing that's one size, and then balance it out with like say like 3 smaller things that end up taking up the same amount of space.
Right. What might that do also if you had, so you guys can imagine, right? It's pretty simple to imagine 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. You have a large picture that maybe takes up the entire quadrant of the top left side, right? And then, so first place your eyes fall when you come to the page, and then an equally large one that takes up the entire quadrant of the bottom right side. What have you effectively done to your design by doing that? If you now have text in your, now you've left room for text in your top right and text in your bottom left, right? So you got picture, picture, text, text. What have you done by doing that? You've cut it diagonally, right? You've cut your page up, right? So one thing to keep in mind is if, let me share my screen with you all so you can see it. Hold on. So I'm on another, okay. Okay, so here are the 4 principles of design. We were talking about balance, and I said you put up something on the top left and bottom right, right? And that's going to obviously, if they're big images, that's going to leave you text or whatever other things for top right and bottom left. is that going to affect, it's going to affect balance, right? Maybe the balance is okay because you have the two images of the equal size, but what else might that affect here? Is it going to affect contrast?
Yeah, because everything's gonna look the same.
Yeah. I mean, there's going to be some contrast, right? In that it's going to be image, text, text, image, but not much, right? What about, what does rhythm mean? Does anyone want to say?
It's like consistency, like within the whole presentation of it.
Yeah.
Flow of like a flow of, I would say like a flow of consistency, like so that yeah, it just has like it's easy to read and easy to look at.
Right. Yeah. It has to do with your like guiding the reader's eyes through your design, right? Like making an easy path visually through the design so that it all seems to flow, right? Um, if you have the design I'm talking about, which is like, you know, two pictures, right? One in the top left, one in the bottom right, and the two images there, so it's cut that way. Does that seem like very good rhythm?
Can you say the images over one more time?
Yeah, so I mean, I wish I could, let me see if I can draw it or something on a new slide. Well, no, not easily. You've got two images on the page, right? One of them is taking up the entire top left corner of the page. Okay. Now, diagonally down from it in the bottom right corner is another image that's taking up that entire 1/4 of the page. Now you can put whatever you want in between on the top right and on bottom left, but is that good rhythm? Like you could have started with images of any size, right? And any mix of them, any number of them. But because you made one decision at the beginning, which was to put an image up at the top left, that meant in terms of balance, you either had to put something bottom right or your whole thing would be out of balance. Does anyone understand why your whole thing would be out of balance if you drop something in the top left that was a big image, took up the entire 1/4 of the top left, but either had nothing or something far smaller somewhere else on the page? So one good way to think about balance is literally as weights. Okay, like if it was literally mass, like if you guys had you guys know if you have a seesaw, right, or a fulcrum with a, you know, like a lever and fulcrum, if you put a heavy weight on one side of that and you don't put that on the other side of it, then the seesaw tips all the way to the side with the heavy weight. The way that you can get them to balance out is you can move one weight towards the center of the fulcrum, right? You guys know what I'm talking about? Like, let me see if I can at least pull that up on the, on the internet. So I'm talking about something like, let me stop the share and then share with my browser screen with you. Okay, so I'm talking about something that looks like this. Right? And the more that if you move one weight towards the middle of the fulcrum, the way that you can balance them out is that if it's a smaller weight, you can move it to the end and you can move the heavier weight towards the middle. So you literally balance it out. So what I'm saying is there's a direct relationship between visual balance and thinking about it in terms of mass. So if you put a huge image on a 8.5 by 11 page at the top left corner, the only way you would be able to create a balance is if you put an equally big image in the bottom right corner, because you've eliminated your ability, since it takes up the entire top left corner, you've eliminated your ability to move that weight back and forth along the line. You guys following me? So if you do that, to go back to, I'm going to stop the share and go back to my PowerPoint screen. If you do that, which of these other principles of design is it going to affect? It's going to affect contrast, right? Because you're going to have equally sized pictures on the top left and bottom right. So if contrast is a good thing, have you created good contrast? They're the same size. There's no contrast, right? So that's probably not good in terms of contrast. In terms of rhythm, which is the ability to flow through the image, do you guys think that looks good? Okay. I think you guys are having a hard time maybe seeing it from this perspective. Does anyone have a view of this yet? Or maybe I should share slides for examples of balance, contrast, rhythm, and unity. Okay. So for balance, this is the idea that if you put two things right next to each other anyway, you create like a third look. So if you put this guy next to this, we then have a whole third idea of what all of this all together looks like. Or this is a famous one. This was of Neville Chamberlain, who is criticized for appeasing Adolf Hitler during the war. Okay, and somebody paired him with this. This is kind of another example, I think, of balance in a way. For contrast, these can be examples of contrast, right? You've got a long image up the top, and then you've got that there, and they're sort of kicking into this, and you've got a smaller image here, okay? Or like something like this creates contrast, right? You've got the small car in the big area. Or this is a way of creating contrast in your image, or this, right? Now, as far as rhythm goes, this is an example of good rhythm where it flows all the way through to the design. Is this a good example of good rhythm? Okay, so Rachel's shaking her head. So Rachel, going back to the original thing, if I were to have a layout, well, what's wrong with this, first of all, as rhythm?
It's not really like, you don't really follow along with it. It's just kind of all there. So you never really know like if there's like an order to look at them or if they're just like all there.
Right. How are we doing with white space here? What's the white space doing? Is it doing something good or bad? Carly, what do you think?
I would say not so good.
Yeah, what's happening with that white space? What's it doing?
I just don't think it looks like appealing, and I feel like it's just kind of like how Rachel said, like you just kind of, it's hard to see the letters.
Yeah, it's trapping the images, right? In a way. So to go back to the original idea that I had of if you had just an 8.5 by 11 page with a big picture dominating the entire 1/4 of the top left, and a big picture, so that would be, can you guys see my cursor? Okay, so like this entire area is taken up by one picture. And then in order to balance it, I'm now in a position where if I put a smaller picture like one that size, it's going to be kind of out of balance, right? Because this thing is so big, it's going to take up all the way like that, right? So even with a smaller picture, it's out of balance no matter what I do. So if that forces my hand then in a way for the sake of balance to put one equally large right here. So if you think about this as a bad example of rhythm, what's the problem with big picture here, text here, text here? Ethan, you got some kind of sound on, I think. So yeah, do you guys see what I'm saying? You notice how the white space here traps the images in a way? If you were to have big picture here, text here, big picture here, text here, then this would be all screwed up. You guys know what I'm saying? Okay. And then the final thing is, and this kind of obviously makes a certain amount of sense, is I don't know if I have a good example of it, but it's like unity. Okay. Which, no, I don't. I mean, I don't know if you guys would consider this a good example of unity or whatever, but let me see if I can find something just quick on the internet. I did have somewhere on my original presentation. Let me see if I can find it. An example of an old school graphic design layout from, here's an example. So let me stop the share and share with this. Can you guys see the Los Angeles Times page? Oh, you can? Okay. So if we were to look at I don't know, we try mid 19th century newspaper page.
Oh wait, hold on. I think we're still on the slides.
So you don't see Los Angeles Times?
It's like Cal State University something.
Yeah. Okay. So hold on. Let me. So an old newspaper might look like. Let me share my browser screen with you. An old newspaper might look like this one on the left, the Belfast newsletter. You guys see that? Ugh, that didn't work very well. I hate, it used to be. So you guys see the Belfast newsletter up here? Is that, Nina, can you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. So an old newspaper used to look like that. So in terms of unity, my point is that the way graphic design has evolved is that a modern newspaper, as you all know, looks like this. And let me pull up the image. Let me just put up the desktop and I'll be able to show you. So a modern newspaper would look like this. So that's the best example I can give you guys of the difference, when it comes down to unity, right? The old Belfast newspaper where everything was, there just really was no graphic design involved because it was really before people were able to do that with print. And then this, where you've got this effort at integrating all the images and everything. So, okay, let me pull up now examples of student work of the assignment you all just did, and let's talk about what you like and what you don't like about these examples. So why don't I put in the chat the link to our site that has this.
Professor?
Yeah.
Do journalists or like because you're talking about design and stuff. Like, what about like user experience, like on the media platform or like on the online platforms? Like, is that something journalists have to do too?
I mean, when you say journalists, it depends on how large a shop you're dealing with and like what you're putting out, Nate, right? So you guys are entering an environment where there's all these different platforms that you're publishing on and all these different situations in which you're producing and delivering content, right? So you may end up working with a group of people on creating journalistic content for a mobile app, or you may end up at something more like a traditional newspaper, like the Star Advertiser, where you've got a layout team designing the actual printed newspaper for every day, but they're also maybe the same people, or maybe it's a different, smaller crew within there designing it for the web. Or you may be at a much smaller newspaper where everybody has to collaborate and has to be involved in some way or another on the actual design, which happens, particularly if you want to, you're an entrepreneur. So there's a good chance that you're going to have to get your hands dirty with this, right? So in terms of user experience, that's a really specific term. And I think you're asking a good question. And this is a good time to bring up the idea of like how many of you guys have friends in the arts who maybe graduated with a BA and have gone on to try and earn some kind of a living with their design skills? Does anybody? So Ashley, you're nodding your head.
My brother.
So how has he had to evolve in his, you know what I'm saying? How has he had to evolve in terms of his skills as a graphic designer? What have you
Well,
noticed?
he's in like film more, but it's I don't know, like we're very different in the sense that I want a job that's like concrete, like you know what I mean, versus
Yeah.
his area is more like you work from job to job, I guess.
Yeah.
And yeah.
But so he went into film. So that's one way to kind of, like, we were looking at these examples of Saul Bass, who started with movie posters and then he ended up doing things like that murder scene in The Shining. So that's one way to translate your graphic design skills. How about this idea of what Nate was saying? So Nate, you're familiar with the idea of what's it called? Use X, or what's it called?
Yeah, UX design.
UX,
It's more
yeah.
like it has to do more with like psychology and computer coding, but
That's right.
it basically has to do, but it pulls on the principles of design, but it's basically the user experience, like how people feel when they interact with your content. And I know like with the New York Times R&D lab and Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, they're all doing like they're kind of playing with that. And so I was wondering like what your take on it, because it is partly graphic design, but it's also like just the new media in general. Like that's kind of the next step is.
Yeah, well, what I'm getting at is that, so you get out of college maybe with experience and talent and skills at graphic design, right? Pretty quickly, in the kind of competitive workplace that you all are entering, that's not going to be enough, right? Just showing that you have a good eye or a good sense of balance, contrast, rhythm, and unity is not going to get you a living as a graphic designer, right? So what they're going to want to see from you more is like the kinds of skills that are really necessary, but also that not everybody has, but that they need. And UX is one of them. So like my friend graduated from college with graphic design. When we used to hang out, and I'm sure he still does, he paints. He's an artist. He's a visual artist, right? The way he's made a living for the past 10 or 15 years at least is with his UX skills. He literally can code all of this stuff. So graphic design was, from a long time ago now going on, not nearly enough. But if he didn't have that foundation in graphic design, he wouldn't have ended up being a UX guy. Does that help answer your question about how these go together, Nate?
Yeah, but I was also kind of wondering, like, do you know like any practical, like in a practical sense, like, because I know there's like some stories that I read that um, it's designed, or like the reporting and the story in general, like it looks like it it serves the UX designer rather than like the the story, if that makes sense. Like it's there's like little sentences and little pictures and content and stuff, but like as you scroll through, like there's like videos and audio playing and stuff. So from what I get out of it, it seems like both the reporter and the UX designer, maybe they're the same person, but it seems like they both knew this is like how they're going to deliver the story. So I was just wondering like how much, like, as a journalist or as a graphic designer, UX designer, do they plan it out before?
It's absolutely crucial. I mean, I started looking into, the reason why I don't work with you guys on stuff like mobile apps and things like that is because it's so important for you guys to learn these things first, like the four principles of design, right? Like it's so important for you guys to learn how to write a news lead. It's so important for you guys to learn how to compose a photograph. But you know, as long ago as 10 years ago, I was looking at, oh man, we really need to train students who are graduating in journalism how to design a mobile app for news. Okay. And when we were looking at doing this, and I'm talking, 2010, we were looking at it right away. You had to if you were going to do any kind of exercise with students where, like, say you guys would create a mobile app, you had to build UX into that project from the very beginning. You either had to train that student on UX, or you had to have another student, say from computer science, or do a group project where you brought those guys in, and they would understand how to do UX. So the issue is, Nate, is that for better or for worse, you guys live in a multi-platform, multimedia world where UX is absolutely essential to a journalist because it is the user experience. And if you want to, say, design something that's like a good, well-designed app that is going to deliver journalistic content, it had better have well thought out user experience. And either you bring that to the table, or you better find someone to work with who can. And as you're observing, all of the news sites have had to take that on. They had to take it on, back when the iPhone was a brand new thing. It's just part now of the puzzle. It's just that there's so many pieces to the puzzle now that we have to think carefully about what you guys learn and at what stage you learn it. Because I mean, think about just on the level of social media and journalism, how many skills and how much, um, how many challenges and how important that is to journalism. But you guys can't be expected to learn everything at once, right? You guys are already learning in one semester photography, design, audio storytelling, infographics. I mean, how many of you guys feel like I should have had more projects with more different, you guys would have been overwhelmed, right? You'd never be able to learn anything. So, I mean, let me throw that out there for a moment before we move on. But how many of you guys think that we're going with the right mix? That, I mean, like Nate, would you say somewhere early on UX should be part of the equation of what you learn?
I think it should be talked about because I think I have a decent understanding of what UX is, but I have no coding background. I don't necessarily understand game theory and like, or I don't I'm not I don't study psychology really, so I don't really understand game theory, but I know how it works, kind of like playing on dopamine receptors and stuff to get engagement through, user experience. So I think just talking about some of those things in the beginning and how like journalism's adopting those different tools, I think would be um, a good thing,
Yeah.
especially now.
I mean, I think 2 points about that and the way that you can think about that in terms of this class. First of all, on the absolute basic first step basis, thinking about rhythm is the first thing you want to think about in terms of UX. Like, how are you guiding the consumer or the reader or the audience's eyes through through something that you've put together, right? So the difference between that one image that we looked at where everybody agreed the white space traps the images, that's bad design, to then the example I gave you of the layout. Like, let me see if I can quickly pull those up because you guys can still see my screen, right? So on a level of just learning UX, right? Just the seeing the difference between, hold on, between, hold on, between this and this is the first thing you would want to learn the first conversation we'd want to have about any kind of user experience, right? This guides people through a design. This does not. Right? Can you guys see what I'm showing? Okay. Beyond that, how else have we, if you guys think about it on a primitive level, how else have we and when else are we addressing user experience or UX this semester? Think, Nate, going back to the beginning of the semester.
Honestly, I have no idea. I
Remember when we did the convergence exercise and you were talking about what the Washington Post was doing in terms of leading people through with the Twitter teases and everything?
I mean, I don't know if that's more marketing than user experience, right? Or is that?
Well, except that when you're talking about user experience, you're talking about what kinds of information and what kinds of options you're presenting to the consumer at what time. And so before you can actually get into the coding and different functionality, like before you can get into like what buttons you want to put up on an app and where you want to put them, it's good to be thinking through with any kind of content, like at what stage you introduce what kinds of information and what kinds of choices. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I definitely think it's um yeah, no, I agree. I think what I'm thinking is probably 2 steps like too far. I think we need to learn the foundation of it. So I think I agree. I was just saying um prefacing exactly like what user experience is and stuff could have been beneficial, but I agree. I think this is a good foundation.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, that's the challenge for us. Well, we are talking about it now, and I'm glad you brought it up, so that people are familiar with the term and the concept, right? But then finally, the other thing I'll point out about this is that when you guys do your final project, you're also thinking about the user experience, because we're going to have a conversation of, I mean, does anyone just want to drop their entire final project with all its different moving parts into the middle of their Wix site? Is that a good idea? Do you want to create an entire separate menu page for that? Do you want to create a separate template for that? Because the whole design is you want the whole design to be built around the whole template, and therefore designed to be built around your final project and not have to conform to the template that you're already using for your Wix site. So even though that's not exactly the kinds of UX type of work that you'd be doing if you were designing a mobile app, it is getting you to think about like, okay, how do I build this website for myself, which is going to have the text and the other multimedia, the slideshow or the multi-track and the infographic. How do I put all that together in a way that looks good and that's going to guide people through my web page, right? Or my website. So it's like, yeah, what you were saying about 2 steps is kind of my point, Nate, is that this is like, I mean, it's a good analogy to sports, right? Like if you guys are learning sports, you have to not only learn the basic skills of like, if you're learning baseball, you're learning pitching and catching or whatever. Um, but you also have to just even be aware that these basic skills are there. Like before we can talk about UX, we have to talk about rhythm and design, because it's the idea of like leading the person's eyes through a design. So, and that's obviously going to be integral to UX, as is like, further down on this thing, or the next couple of slides, I do stylistic consistency, right? So part of UX also is keeping things stylistically consistent. And the reason I have these 2 slides, this is Wired magazine, and this is the New Yorker magazine. You can go to any page of Wired or any page of the New Yorker, and it's the New Yorker, or it's Wired, because they've created all these things to establish a look. So these are just basement level or ground level things that you have to think about in terms of UX before you can get into the more sophisticated parts of it. But excellent question. Does anyone else have any other points or at this point, or can I bring up the examples of student work from the layouts and ask you guys to critique it in terms of the 4 principles of design that we talked about? Sound good? Okay, so let me first of all pull it up on my screen. Student work. And then if it's easier to look at on your own thing, why don't I put it in the chat? So here's the link to our website to the examples of student work in the chat. So now let me just scroll to, okay. So these are the examples of student work. Some are good, some are not so good, some are bad, right? What do you guys think of this one? Well, let's scroll through first, and then we'll look. Okay, so I'm going to just scroll through slowly, first of all, so you have some range of comparison. Okay. So you know what? Rather than me going one by one through each of these, why don't I give you guys a minute to look at them and think about them and things you notice. Maybe pay close attention to the ones that clearly aren't working and see what you can figure out clearly aren't working. Let me give you guys like just 2 minutes or 3 minutes, okay? Go through these, make a list of the ones that aren't working and why, and the ones that are working and why. And let's see what people come up with. So go to the, I guess, go to the link. You won't be able to do it if I'm scrolling around. See if you can notice what some of the most common problems are with the ones that aren't working also. I'll give you guys another minute. Okay. So why don't I choose some of you guys who haven't gotten a chance to speak up yet? So we'll do Kristen, Ethan, and Alicia for first wax at these. So Krista, do you want to take on either what you didn't like or what you did like?
Sure. I thought that the first one, where it kind of like has a lot going on, I kind of found that one was really cool, but it was hard to read the writing.
Yeah.
Because it's like the gray on top of the darker or on top of the lighter gray. Um, but I actually liked how they like made some of the photos transparent and like incorporated it in, because rather than just putting in the photos like as they were on the website. um but yeah, that was kind of the big one that stuck out to me. And then some of the other ones, it was kind of hard to read the writing as well, but this one was like the most prevalent.
Yeah, I mean, you can see they were. Do you think they were just using InDesign for this?
Maybe, I don't know. Hard to say. I mean, obviously they have some experience with something to do with photos, but
Yeah, I mean, this also, a lot of this was done in Photoshop, right? Um, yeah, so what do you guys think? You know, how many of the rest of you guys had problems with this where it's actually kind of hard to read, right? Here, over here. Um, so that's something that, I mean, how important is that to think about in terms of graphic design for journalism?
I think it's really important to be
Yeah,
able to read
right.
the words.
Because they will tune you out, right? People will just not, they'll say screw it, right? So I don't know if any of you guys looked at it, but this was the main point that I make in that first video that I made about design, right? Where I show examples of magazines, and I say it's one thing to kind of see yourself as an artist and make aesthetic choices like this student is making here, which they have a great sense of like a look. It's another thing though to be a mass communicator, and as a mass communicator and as a journalist, you're going to always need to put clarity over stylistic or aesthetic choices. If your aesthetic choices interfere with the clarity of your design, you've got a real problem, right? Um, is there anything else, Krista, you wanted to point out?
No, that was kind of all. That was it. I mean, that in general kind of ruins every other component, because like then you can't have consistency because you can't really read it.
Yeah. So Ethan, how you doing? Can you weigh in here?
Yeah. I agree completely for the first one. And then the fourth one down, I had issues with, just because the first one was like, I think too much design went into it, that it cluttered the reading. And then on the fourth one down, they focused a little too much on how easily you can read it and understand it. So it's a little too simple and not that appealing, I think.
All right, now we're on to one where there's a major issue. Maybe I'll table it and see if one of you guys wants to bring it up first. Does anyone else see a major issue? You're getting at it, Ethan, or if you want to take a stab, what's the other major issue with the text here?
It looks like it's somebody took it out of Google Docs and highlighted everything.
Yeah.
It's
And
like in squared bubbles.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's some other, like, if you're working in graphic in InDesign, what is one of the things you would do to correct what's going on there, just with the text in the boxes? You don't have to answer it, Ethan, if someone else wants to.
Personally, I would try to make it a little bit more even. Like some of the lines are all the way to the edge, but the other ones aren't.
Yeah, I mean, this will also, does anyone think it's good to have the text bumping up against the very edge of the box?
Definitely not.
Okay, so one of the things that, this is why we're having this conversation, and then I'm asking you guys to go back to your work before turning it in to make revisions. How many of you guys now, if you take a good look at your text, look at how many of these, when you look at them, where the problem is about the text? How many of them have the text bumping up against the edge like that? Do you have that in your design? Does anyone have that in theirs that wants to admit it? Okay, so do you guys know how to fix that in InDesign? Let me see if I can pull it up. I don't want to get into the weeds with it, but I'll show you like where it is basically on the interface. And then, it won't be too many steps for you to then figure out how to correct it. I don't think. If you are, I'll get on with you and walk you through it. But I just don't want to spend too long screwing around with the software. Well, while InDesign it's taking forever to open up. Hold on. I'm on a laptop today. That's why it's a little slower. Hold on. So I don't know. I guess I'll just go to, this is a flyer I made ages ago. Okay, so here's the flyer. If I go into text here, okay, let me make sure I'm in classic essentials view. Let's see. Yeah, essentials classic. So if I go into text here, you're gonna find the options for indenting. I feel like they're not all coming up because my screen is so small. Hold on. Yeah, so you see these buttons here, y'all? I think these are gonna be where you adjust so that your text isn't bumping up against the edges. Did anyone fix that? Am I correct here? I think that's right. Not messing with it too much. I think that's what you're gonna use. So yeah, I mean, anyway, the point is that one of the most common errors that people make with their first designs is that they don't pay adequate attention to handling the text and to making it look right for all the reasons that you guys are saying, right? Going back to the website, Alicia.
Yeah, I like the fifth one.
That would be this one?
Yeah, because I think it's easy to follow. It's like quite simple.
Right. Now, let me bring up a really interesting and I think important point that, I mean, you could call it the icing on the cake with some of these, but I do think it's a really important concept to talk about right away, okay? And that's, let me pull up an example of a design that a friend of mine created. He's the guy who does UX stuff now. And he and I worked on these. These are, let me pull it up. So can you guys see the newspapers on my screen here?
Yeah.
So these are actually enormous like posters. on foam board. They're very big. They're like almost half my height. They take up this entire wall of my office. See, like that to the right is my door of my office. And I had written a study about Chicago newspapers in the early 20th century, and he knew that I had to design 3 posters of this size for a presentation. And so we got together, and as a designer, the first thing he thought, and I think I told you guys about this, is he had said, well, why don't we make them look like old Chicago newspapers? So he went out and he did some research on what kind of fonts they used and what their layouts look like. And this is what he ended up with. I mean, could it have looked more like old Chicago papers, and could he done better? Probably better. I mean, probably, sure. But you can see how he began with a concept. He didn't get anywhere into this before he had developed a whole concept for it, right? So my question for you guys is, if we go back to these designs, obviously I had conversations with these guys, but do you guys see anything conceptually going on with the way they used either robots and technology in their design to make it more interesting? Can you guys come up with examples? Like, look at these 3 layouts. Is there anything where they're thinking, more in terms of ideas for them and incorporating that into their designs?
They revolved like the whole spread based on like this, like the general idea to make it more exciting, I guess.
Yeah. Well, like this, you can see the laser shooting out of the eye, which really helps with the rhythm too, right? In terms of directing our gaze and how we go through the experience. She also did this thing where she used this photo effect to add to the rhythm, the echo or the blur or whatever. What did this student do that's more sort of concept-y?
Put the gears in the background.
Yeah, the gears. And this student did it with the circuits, right? So those are, you could argue those are little touches, but on another level, they're really important, right? So let's see, who else hasn't spoken up that that could talk? Who's E? I can't tell who that is. There's an E on there. I can't tell.
I think
Aaron.
that's me.
Yeah,
Aaron.
Hi, Aaron.
Hi.
Hi. That's weird the way either you guys have control over whether your name appears on this or not, because sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. But anyway, Aaron, do you have any thoughts about what you either like or what's a problem with some of this?
I would agree that I like the 5th one, but I also do like the 2nd one too.
Let me
and I think I like the use of
this
like shapes, and it really like kind of directs your eye to look over the whole page. Like how they did the same thing using the eye of the top left photo and
Right.
creating that shape to give the title, and then also using the triangle on the right side. It kind of just like directs your eye nicely.
How many of you think that this would have been better though if she had flipped it? So, okay, Kate had to go.
I think so. I know what you mean, like turning it to the right side of the page so then it leads you to the rest of the layout.
Yeah. So be careful about that with these profile images, okay? The other thing that you guys want to be really careful about, and I tried to emphasize this, I think, in the training, was how many of you honestly have an image where it's distorted because in resizing it, you didn't do the right thing with holding down the shift button and your mouse in resizing it. Do any of you guys have distorted images? Okay, so make sure to fix that because that's a big red flag for non-professional design, right? So, okay. Let's see. Does anyone else, Nina, do you have any thoughts about what you liked or didn't like? Maybe we'll just kind of cycle through everyone.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you said the one that I was gonna say with the laser pointing out of the eye to the text. I like that, and then the one we were just talking about with the triangles. I like that the little robot is pointing to the text in the corner,
Yeah.
in the bottom corner.
In the bottom. Oh, yeah. This guy with the pointing.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess just what I'd be careful with this particular thing in the images I've given you is you've got a lot of faces gazing and you've got this guy with the finger pointing. Make sure that they're doing it, that they're directing themselves in a way that leads the viewer's eyes through the design. Right?
Yeah.
So go maybe over your design and check that out as well. But definitely one of the biggest common issues is, I mean, the distorted images, being careful with the text, and the which way are the faces looking and that kind of thing. Okay, who's V? I don't know who V is either. Is that? Oh, I don't know. Is it Victoria? I'm not sure, but let's see. Maybe we'll just do a go round. So, any thoughts, Rachel, on what you liked, what you didn't like?
I like that, like the colors are, if you look at the image, it's like a triangle on that one. You can tell that the rest of the colors were like taken from that. So it kind of works.
Yeah, so there's some really good things happening with colors. So do you guys know how to find like have you guys ever seen a color wheel? Does everybody know about that? Let me pull one up. Because I need this. Like when I designed my site, I ended up using a color wheel just so that I could make sure that I was getting the right combination of colors together because I didn't trust myself to do it. So I used a color wheel. So let me pull one of those up. So okay, these are color wheels, and what they show is that you can either do contrasting colors if you go across the wheel, or if you look at what's directly adjacent to a color, you have complementary colors. So it's a good guide for knowing kind of how to put colors together. Sometimes you might want contrast, sometimes you might want it to be complementary, but at least you become kind of more aware of that if you aren't naturally that way. Carly, how about you? Any thoughts about what you liked, didn't like?
On the third one, I thought the colors were a little interesting. Like the box at the bottom left corner was kind of like popped out at me, which didn't like bring my eyes to the text. And then the text is just kind of bunched. But
what did you guys think of this one? Wait, let me get to it. You guys can all see my screen still. See, this person did an interesting job with the gears too, right? And this is very clear. I like how clear and how well it flows. What about this one? Any thoughts?
You can, like, the titles for the 4 of them, you can see, like, it doesn't look like they tried to like blend it, I guess. I don't know, because the first 2 are the same, I think, and the bottom 2 are the same. It just kind of looks bad.
Right. Yeah, so that's interesting, right? I mean, it was I'll give the student this. It was an original approach, right? Does it work for you guys? Does it not work for them? Ashley, doesn't sound like it works for you so well. No. Okay. Let me just quickly throw up one more quick thing to think about, and we'll call it a day. Okay. So to go back to my PowerPoint, um, I guess what I would say is, let me go to this PowerPoint for a second. That if you go back to as early as the Egyptian Book of the Dead, that's like one of the first examples of graphic design, right? And then you guys know about the golden ratio, or what is this called? Fibonacci's triangle or something. What is it called? Let me see. Hold on. Golden ratio. Fibonacci's spiral. Okay, so that's the idea that in nature you have a perfect kind of balance of perspectives, and you can find that in like examples of the Greek Parthenon. So what you've got there is the repetition of that ratio, and you can see where the basic concept that's in the seashell that you find in nature is like actually in the ancient Greek Parthenon. So some of these ideas are very old. And then even when you go back to the invention of the Gutenberg press, you have the beginnings of like thinking about layout and design. But they weren't able to really do this in a way that was very effective for implementing it for mass production. So you don't really start having the ability to integrate design into printing into pretty well into the 19th century. And then what happens is people call this kind of the train wreck period of design, where it's like, oh, we can do all these things, and it becomes really ugly and overwhelming, right? There's just like too many fonts or whatever. So people say that there's a rule that you should only have like 2 or 3 fonts in a layout. If you go any farther than that, you get into the train wreck, right? So a friend of mine who's a designer had a little bit of fun with that, because a lot of artists obviously like to break the rules. So he made this. What do you guys think? Is that a successful design for a menu? Did he succeed in breaking the rules? Any opinion?
I think it works for a menu because, like, if you're gonna go get food, you're gonna look at it no matter what. But I think it works. I don't know if it would work for like
A magazine?
information. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you had the introduction of photography. This is like, when is this? Either, do I give a year? Well, this is lithography, which is when they were able to sort of mass print these. And then here we go. Here's the beginning of photography. And I don't recall what year this is. I'd have to blow it up, but it's like either I think maybe 1850s or 1870s, where you had the first images appear in the newspaper. But then you had a reaction to all the sort of industrial era stuff by the 1920s, when by which time newspapers and magazines were able to do more with their mass publishing. And so that's when you had things like this going on. And so one thing to think about as a designer is that there are all of these, different types of styles that have evolved. Like what I was just showing you, here's another example, is Art Nouveau. And this was kind of a reaction against the like crude industrial look of things in the 19th century, where they were influenced by like Asian vases and Asian design. This is more Art Nouveau, right? And then you get into things like in the 20s, there's Art Deco, and there's Dadaism, this is Dadaism, and this is more Dadaism, which was kind of this thing that happened right after World War I, where people really played with the chaos and the meaningless. It was like a very disillusioned period. But my point in showing you all this is just that be aware that there are all these different styles of art and movements within art, and that graphic designers use this stuff often. They're influenced by it when they make design, right? So, and then you get into, this is the modernism stuff, where they were breaking from the traditional, effort at realistic representations of things. So this is this famous nude descending down the staircase, and you get into avant-garde and surrealist art. This was a huge influence in the 20s, which is comic strips and the kind of art that started coming in from popular culture. This was like an avant-garde. It was a comic strip in the paper, Crazy Cat, but it was also a lot of intellectuals found it fascinating because it brought in all these really interesting philosophical ideas and surreal ideas into a simple comic strip. That's Art Deco. This is another example of Art Deco where they're being influenced by, Egyptian motifs. You see Art Deco all over Miami, right? If you guys have been to South Beach in Miami and around there, it's a huge center of like Art Deco architecture. And then you get into the later decades when you get into like pop art, like Andy Warhol. And what is this one? Robert Frank, we learned about in photography, and psychedelic stuff in the 60s, and then punk rock and hip hop by the 80s. Right. So these are all things to think about when you do a design and you're thinking about a look. Okay, so that's kind of everything I had to explain. Does anyone have any questions or final thoughts? How many of you guys, let's just do a quick lightning round here. Yes, no, after seeing this, are you going to revise your design? Rachel, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't think like too drastically, but definitely like a little bit.
Yeah, what kind of thing would you change?
I think I want to pay more attention to like movement of it and like directing things differently. So like the flow and like,
Right.
I don't know.
Rhythm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So you guys make sure to write about this stuff in your reflection, right? Your 4 principles of design. Carly?
Yes. I think I need to change, like mine's pretty basic right now, so I kind of just want to add like guess a little bit more.
Cool. Ashley, any thoughts?
I'm definitely gonna do the text thing because my text was like boarded up against the box.
Right. Okay. Well, yeah, that's definitely an essential one to do. Anything with distorted photos that you got to fix?
I fixed them. I just like had them at one point,
Right.
but I don't know how much more I can do with the actual design because I was having a really hard time using the InDesign in general. So,
Are you any more comfortable with it now?
yeah, I just wouldn't say I'm confident with it at all.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at least you got started on it, right? Can you understand why I asked you to do that instead of just Wix or whatever?
Yeah, I think it's a good program to use. It's just like a lot of the other editing software stuff, they're like pretty similar and easy to pick up, but this one just had so many like different little things to it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not an easy program. You know, I kind of wish there was a simpler way to do this. Alicia, how about you?
Probably make more contrast because it's like I put all the pictures in the same size now, so it's kind of yeah too
Yeah.
bad.
And remember, did you understand what I was explaining about balance and weights?
Yeah.
Okay. Aaron, how about you?
Definitely the same thing as Ashley. I want to go back and look at all my text to make sure there's like spacing.
Yeah, very common error, right? Krista?
I feel good about it, but I just can't figure out how to get the text to not press against the images. I think that's a common problem, but I'm gonna look it up right after this.
Did you try those buttons that I was showing you?
Yeah, I have it pulled up right now, but I just can't figure it out. It's not going, so I'll just have to look.
Okay, if you need help, let me know, okay? And I'll work with you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, you guys. I'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye. Hey, Rachel.
Hi. So following up after yesterday, I just wanted to check back in about like how to pitch to local news organizations.
Oh, right. Yeah, thank God you reminded me. Okay, so let's see. I mean, I think first of all, you need to, in order to do it, you need to figure out, you need a news hook. You always need a news hook with these people. Second thing you need to do is you need to check the clips. You remember what I mean by that term?
No.
Check the clips means look at all the media coverage about it.
Okay.
So nobody's going to be interested in a story that not only they might have covered, but that some other paper got to and beat them on and did the coverage already.
Mhm.
So they, especially when they don't know you, and when you, I mean, it's going to be hard for you. Like, I definitely encourage you to apply to try and pitch to like professional things. But you have to realize that one major obstacle you're going to face at first is that you don't have any clips yet. So that can be a good reason to direct them to your site if you have anything up yet that you're proud of that you think works. But it's still not a clip, right?
Mhm.
So although, I have to say, having said that, like Nate had pretty good success at being able to pitch to some pretty major professional outlets without really much experience. So although at this point he has some things to put down that he's done, but that's
Mhm.
going to be an obstacle you're going to face. But the first thing you got to do is check the clips, make sure that your idea has a news hook, has a good focus, and um, like hasn't already been covered. And if something has been covered, then you need to find an angle to it that hasn't already been done.
Okay.
Right? Then the second thing you want to do is you want to pitch them the story. You don't want to say, "Oh, here it's already done. Here you go. Take it or leave it." Like you're always giving them a pitch, and you're saying, "I have this idea. I would do it." I mean, you also have to, well, I guess that in order, you gotta find your news hook, check the clips, make sure it fits in, and then find the right outlet,
Mhm.
right? And once you found it, like, you're not going to pitch an audio story to, a magazine, an online magazine. And you're not necessarily going to pitch a print story, like a text thing that you've written, to the local radio station.
Mhm.
So, you've got to think about what medium they're in and be like, I want to do this kind of a story. I mean, if it's, you don't have to spell it out. If they're a magazine and they generally run written articles, then you don't have to say, I want to do a written story, because that they're going to assume that's what you need. Don't do that, because then it'll seem like you don't know what you're doing. Right.
Mhm.
But, then, I mean, what I used to do was I would basically use some version of the alternative lead and nut graph for my pitch.
Okay.
So, you need to be, not only, you need to be moving beyond the idea of checking the clips, looking for the outlet, finding the news hook, to where you've done preliminary interviews and that's obvious from your pitch that you've already done your reporting. You know what's out there. You know nobody's covered this. You want to point out that nobody's covered this. And you want to write it in that way that I showed you about, write an opening hook that draws people into the story and then give them the nut graph. This is what the story's all about. And, in that short 2 or 3 paragraph or 4 paragraph pitch, make sure that you point out what people have covered and what they haven't covered, or where this fits in, or, make sure you emphasize that nobody's really done this story yet.
Okay.
Does that all make sense?
Yeah, that does.
And what you can do is you can write a query. It's called a query when you write one of these, and, share it with me when it's done. And the other thing is that, like, let's say you're pitching an article, you can say, I'm also planning to take photographs with it, or if there's another, or an infographic, whatever, you want to sort of argue. If you're going to say an infographic, maybe explain, I was thinking a good, or a good sidebar, which is like a little smaller article that goes along with a big article, would be such and such. So in other words, you give them an idea of how it could be a package and what else you could bring other than the written article. Like, I plan to take photos with it, or, and I can provide those in the cut lines, or I plan to do a sidebar about A, B, or C, or I plan to also produce a slideshow if you're interested. That, it's hard to say. You might offer different options or that, but I feel like a lot of these websites have moved away from, like, slideshows were a big thing years ago, and now they're not. I still think they're a good learning experience, but if you're going to say slideshows, you might frame that a little bit, like, one possibility would be this, another would be that, that kind of thing.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, usually I think these days a lot of them, when they say multimedia, some of the bigger sites have video with the print, but to do the video right, you need to kind of do it professionally, and that's not something we're really taking on. So, so yeah, any more thoughts about which of these you would do?
For like the topic or like the added thing?
The topic.
So I was thinking, because I really want to go into like travel writing and like, or like even just like tourism within places. So I was trying to think of like mini staycation type things, like places in Minnesota that are open right now for like to escape to. With like a winter side to it. And just like coming up with a list and like hopefully like interviewing like the owners of like different places or different attractions.
Yeah. So, speaking of UX, I mean, what that is what you'd probably call like service journalism.
Okay.
In the sense that, like, here's a guide, like you'll see in a lot of like BuzzFeed or whatever, these publications that have like listicles, what a listicle is? Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I was kind of thinking this might turn into.
Yeah. Well, I would do that. I mean, at least for the final project, is like a side. I would offer them like kind of a guide to it if you want to do something like that, that's written, that's like a narrative with a listicle.
Okay.
As a sidebar. So, and images. I think you definitely need images if you're going to do that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
Yeah. But then if you want to do that, then you want to think out, what do you think is the important information that you would be providing readers to?
I think definitely like places that are open and like how they're different, and like with COVID, like yeah, just what's different about them, but like the opportunity to still go and like have that experience, or if like that experience does look different from normal.
Right. All right. Well, cool. I don't know. I mean, why don't you work on that? Like I said, you're still at the stage where I think the best thing for you to do right now is reach out in different directions, see where things stand by the end of the week,
Okay.
which is challenging, right? But I also think it's going to be the best thing for you. I mean, I might think Minneapolis, Minneapolis, Minneapolis because of your ability to get around and everything else.
Mhm.
I mean, I think you have a good idea with that. But I also think that like if you're trying to come up with an idea or project that you can pitch, like what's going on in the town that is a good Minneapolis story, that is something a lot of people would care about that you can do something about. Is there any big thing coming up? Like we just had the Hawaii Film Festival, which I wasn't really aware of here, you know. So you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Things like that where you can get a jump on it. I mean, I've done stories like when they were opening up the new Congo gorilla forest in the Bronx Zoo. I got a jump on all the other reporters in New York City on that because I found it in the mayor's budget report. I saw this line for $350 million for Congo gorilla forest in a city budget report. And I said, what the hell is $350 million for? And what the hell is a Congo gorilla forest? This is New York City. It was just one
Yeah.
line. But because I caught that one line and it jumped out at me, I beat the whole national press and the New York City press at the zoo story. So something like that, you know, when you find it, it'll be a no-brainer, right? If you can find the story. And if you look on stuff that isn't news sites, but is stuff where people are already beginning to post advance notice about their events or their art exhibits or their culture, whatever, then you know you have a jump on them, on everybody else with it.
Mhm.
But I think the travel one's a great idea. I just think right now you should you know, go reach out in different ways and see what's looking best by the end of the week.
Yeah.
So, okay, keep me informed.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, take care.
Bye, you too.